Did the Pittsburgh Steelers offense grow up on Saturday night? And if so, what does that mean for their matchup against the Baltimore Ravens this Sunday night? Let's talk about it today on Steeler Country. All right, welcome to Steeler Country. I am Tony Serino. A special Friday edition, a post-Christmas, pre-New Year's Eve, pre-New Year's Day edition of Steeler Country. Big week for the Steelers. Of course, it's Ravens week. It is this is the biggest week of the year. Especially this being the road game, the one that Kenny's going to start. This is one I've certainly had circled on my calendar. Since Kenny was announced to be the starter, I was like, hey, how's he going to do against the Ravens? Obviously, he didn't play in the first matchup. He will play. He will play in this Sunday's game in Baltimore. A tougher test. I mean, certainly on the road Sunday night. It's gonna be a huge game. It's just a huge atmosphere because playoffs. 2-6 at the break, but here we are, week 17, talking about the playoffs. The dream is not dead when it comes to the Steelers and their playoff hopes. The Steelers, they have a glimmer. They have a glimmer of hope. Although, I know all the websites will tell you 1%, 3%, 2%, whatever these numbers are. I think if you go to Vegas and you try to bet everything the Steelers need, I think it's 35-1 odds right now. It's a long shot. The Steelers need to win out, but the games on Sunday that are going to matter are not just Steelers Ravens. Obviously, the Steelers have to win to keep their playoff hopes alive. They will also need the Patriots to beat the Dolphins. That game is at 1:00. So if you're looking for a game to watch at 1:00 on Sunday, Patriots Dolphins, if you're a Steeler fan, that is the one to watch. It doesn't stop there, though. Seahawks Jets at 4:00. Equally matters. The Seahawks need to win that game. Basically, the Steelers need the Dolphins to lose and the Jets to lose, and they need to win. If those three things happen, they will be alive in the playoffs going into Week 18, their home game against the Cleveland Browns. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Because, again, the Steelers have to win on Sunday night, something they could not do 3 weeks ago against the Baltimore Ravens when they played them in Acrisure Stadium. Of course, that was a game in which Kenny Pickett started, played the first two series of that game, left with a concussion, and Mitch Trubisky came in, played well enough. I mean, again, the turnovers were the big problem there, right? The 3 turnovers were really the difference in that football game. And so when you look at it now, you think about, okay, now you got to go on the road into a hostile environment against a Ravens defense that's still playing really well. And I understand they're going to be a little shorthanded in this one. No Calais Campbell, no Marcus Peters in this matchup. But that front seven is going to be every bit as nasty as the one that they saw 3 weeks ago. And this is going to be one of the toughest tests Kenny Pickett has had to face. Probably the toughest test. I mean, this is a huge moment for him, wanting to keep the playoff hopes alive. Division rival, the division rival, and it's on the road, and it's in prime time. Boy, I just can't wait to see what Kenny's going to do in this kind of atmosphere. But let's start there, because Mike Tomlin had this line, and he said it during the game. You saw, and any kind of on the field stuff you saw with Tomlin throughout the game. He was doing the whole looking in the players' eyes before the game and all that. And wanted, he really made this an emphasis that last drive meant something for the Steelers, not just in that moment, right? I mean, I've talked about on AFC North Talk last week. Obviously, what happened on Saturday was kind of bigger than just the game itself because of what it meant with the Steelers celebrating the life of Franco Harris, who passed away, the week prior to that game. A game that was already going to be celebrating Franco and his accomplishments as a player became a celebration of his life after his passing. And so as I talked about in AFC North Talk, it was such a fitting ending to that game that the Steelers were able to drive down in the final moments of that game and get a game winner, so reminiscent of how Franco did. Franco, a rookie, kind of plucking the ball out of the air. This wasn't maybe as the Pickett to Pickens play maybe wasn't as spectacular as as Franco plucking the ball out of the air. But, rookie to rookie, when it was Franco Harris, a rookie player, plucking the ball out of the air to give the Steelers 13 points. The Steelers end up with 13 points in their win over the Raiders. But Tomlin kept making this point. That was not just a great drive. That was not just a great moment in Steeler history of the Steelers mounting this comeback in a game celebrating Franco Harris. Kept saying this line, we grew up today. We grew up today. He's talking about this offense. We grew up. Yeah, it's an interesting thing because it's something that I've talked about on this channel a lot. I haven't done a lot of videos on the channel. Actually, I've talked about it on AFC North Talk a lot, but I talked a lot about this on the last week's show. We talked about, hey, this whole like draft pick thing and the tanking and all that, it doesn't matter as long as this Steeler offense continues to look better week in and week out. Because as I talked about on that show, and I'll mention it here, there's no infusion of talent coming on this offense. There's not going to be a big rebuild of this offense year over year. The players that you're watching today are likely going to be the exact same players a year from now. I could imagine that there will be some shuffling on that offensive line, but if you're imagining the Steelers are going to start next season with 3 or 4 new starters on that offensive line, I mean, I just think you're fooling yourself. There's no doubt the Steelers will maybe improve 1, maybe 2 if they're lucky positions on that offensive line. And that's it. At the wide receiver position, you may add a new slot receiver. At the running back position, I think they'll stay exactly the same. Tight end, stay exactly the same. And at quarterback, obviously, Kenny Pickett is going to be your guy. And so if we're talking about an offense where, how is this going to get better? Well, it's not going to get better from an infusion of talent. It's going to get better because these players have to play better. The players on the field have to grow up, as Tomlin said. And that's what's so interesting to me is was that a moment? Was that just a drive in a football game? Or was that something bigger, as Tomlin says? Was that a grow-up moment where we're going to put a flag in the ground and say, this was the moment the Steelers offense turned the corner. This was the moment that young Steelers offense turned the corner and became the Steelers, whatever they're going to become. I think, first of all, it starts with Kenny. I said this on AFC North Talk. I thought it was an up-and-down performance from him and, kind of a Jekyll and Hyde thing. In watching the All-22 back now, I was probably too harsh on him. I think overall, I think more things to like about Kenny in this performance than not. It feels like Kenny is like on the brink of really in a breakthrough performance. I think there's a couple things he really needs to work on, but overall, I think his comfortability in this offense now is the rapport that he's starting to build, especially with guys like Deontay and Pat Freiermuth, are really showing through. I think the one thing he's really got to work on, this has been a problem for him, probably going back to, I would say, the Eagles game, maybe the Miami game prior to, bailing from a clean pocket. It just feels like he has this time in his head where he's like, time's up, got to go, right? And instead of just kind of sit in his pocket, the offensive line has actually done a decent job in pass protection since the break. I mean, I think this offensive line has really, I wouldn't say that they're a top 10 or top 5 unit, but they've certainly been above the line. But Kenny at times just gets this thought in his head of, I got to go. And it's all of a sudden, instead of sitting in the pocket and waiting for things to happen in front of him, he's rolling out. And the worst thing that Kenny does is he doesn't just bail from the pocket. It's always like doing the pirouette out of the pocket, kind of cutting himself off, cutting half the field off from himself. I think that right now is his worst trait. If he could do a better job, the pocket presence of understanding, I have a little more time here. Yes, this play did not work. The quick game stuff is not there, but let's let this play breathe a little bit and try to make some plays. You saw that last week. I think there was a play where he stepped up. It was a dig route to Deontay. He stepped up in the pocket. I think that was the one where he was a little inaccurate on it. But still, I mean, it's the kind of thing that you like to see more from Kenny. That ability to stay in the pocket, eyes downfield, understand what's happening around you, and deliver the ball. Because there are window throws to be made in this offense. I don't love the Matt Canada offense. Watching it again, watching the All-22 again, it just reminds me of all the problems that this offense has, right? All the times when you feel like, boy, why is Kenny just checking it down here? Trust me, when you go back and watch the All-22, like when Kenny checks down are not the problems that I have with Kenny Pickett. Generally speaking, when Kenny's checking the ball down, it's because the whole play it was doomed from the start. So that's number one, is I'd like to see Kenny be more patient in the pocket, especially in those moments where he's kept clean, but he makes it harder on himself by bailing out, cutting the field off, and then giving himself very limited windows to make a completion. The second thing I'd love to see Kenny, just let it rip, man. There's sometimes with Kenny where just let it go, dude. Let it go. When you watch Kenny's eyes, it's probably one of Kenny's weaker things right now as well is you can kind of follow his eyes and figure out where he's going to go with the football. He doesn't do it. I wouldn't say he stares everybody down, but he doesn't do a great job of manipulating with his eyes right now. But man, there are times where, I mean, he's looking at it. You can see it on tape. He's staring at it. He's like, that's it. That's the throw. Just make it, right? And you can see there was a couple double clutches last week. Just some times with Kenny where you're just like, Kenny, the throw is there. Just make the throw. Especially, I think at times, it's right before he's about to bail out. there was the play last week. I think it was third down, maybe it was second down. It was the drive before the last one where he had Najee. It was definitely a third down because it was like a 3rd and 3. And he has Najee over the middle, and he looks at it, and he decides not to throw it, then rolls out, and then decides to make the throw. The defender bats it down. Yeah, it's those moments with Kenny where you're like, no, Kenny, just let the ball go, man. And that's what I'm hoping when we talk about the grow up stuff. We talk about this was a moment where he grew up. That's the thing he has to grow up in, right? If this is a game in which this offense is now going to feel confident in itself, I'm like, okay, hold on. Maybe we got something here. If Kenny's going to start letting the ball go in those moments, I think Kenny is due for, like, I don't know, there's only 2 games left, and one of them is against Baltimore on the road. So, like, this prediction is probably going to end up falling flat because there's not enough time left. But it does feel like Kenny's going to have a legitimately great game coming up. And I know there's only 2 games left for that to happen. Is it going to happen against Baltimore on Sunday night? Boy, what a moment that would be. Probably more likely it'll happen against Cleveland. Maybe it doesn't happen at all because there's just not enough games left. But it does feel like Kenny's starting to turn a corner. I think his comfortability in this Matt Canada offense, kind of understanding where he needs to go with the football, understanding the coverages that he's seeing, is very, very, there's not as much time now where you feel like he just completely got fooled. There was that one time where the Raiders were showing cover 3. They were showing it like a man-to-man outside on Pickens. It looked like they were bringing the linebacker on a blitz. Kenny checks the play to like this slant route so that Pickens could have a catch and go on 3rd down. And then they bailed out of it and just caught Kenny, with his pants down, essentially. I mean, he throws that slant route and Pickens is tackled for like a 2-yard gain. But those moments are getting fewer and fewer. I think he's doing a much better job of seeing the field. Much better job, by the way, of the intermediate throws. He's been one of the worst quarterbacks in the league at intermediate throws throughout, his tenure as a Steelers quarterback. I think this week he was much better in that way. Much better about letting those things go. He missed one to Freiermuth that Freiermuth probably should have caught. He missed one to Deontay. But overall, I think that again that's another part of his game that's getting better. The other part of his game that I'm glad is starting to translate is Kenny ball. The YOLO Kenny stuff that I always talk about. You go back to his tape at Pitt. People talk about how he's the pocket presence and all that. And like that stuff at Pitt was like, okay, maybe. But like the stuff that should translate is when he, is that kind of extracurricular. And that really hasn't translated thus far. Kenny on the move, Kenny outside the pocket, Kenny bailing out, really hasn't had, we haven't seen a lot of Kenny building a rapport with certain guys when he bails out of the pocket. But you did see some of that on Saturday night. Certainly with Freiermuth, the one where he kind of throws across his body on the rollout on that last drive. I think it was the first completion of that drive to get a first down there. Great play from Kenny. There was one where he had to roll out to his left a little bit, and he had to throw it kind of around a defender to get it to Warren. I mean, those are the kind of plays that if you go back and watch Kenny in college, I mean, you see these things over and over and over again. And the fact that that's starting to show itself, again, so much of modern quarterback play is not just play within structure, where I think Kenny is starting to get really good. But I think he, this improvement out of structure and that ability to make plays out of structure is going to be such a big part about whether or not Kenny Pickett's out, where is his ceiling? Where is Kenny's ceiling going to end up being? Because as I've always said, like my worry with Kenny Pickett is that he kind of levels out to like Kirk Cousins or Derek Carr or Ryan Tannehill, one of these guys, and it's like, okay, you can win with those guys, but I think we all know that's kind of a bad place to be, right? Because he's just good enough that you're like, well, we can't get rid of him. But he's bad enough that everyone else, basically you're the only team in the league that feels like you can win with this guy, right? I mean, I think everyone looks at Kirk Cousins and says, yeah, I mean, the Vikings are going nowhere with Kirk Cousins. Vikings fans, though, this year are certainly telling themselves, oh, we can win the Super Bowl. Oh, I mean, we're with 12 games with Kirk Cousins. We're winning it all. Same thing last year, right? Think about the Titans last year. Number 1 seed in the AFC. The Titans fans we're the best team in the AFC. We got the bye, baby. We are going to the Super Bowl. There's no doubt. And everyone else looking at the team saying, you got Ryan Tannehill, dog. You're going nowhere fast. I mean, maybe you win a playoff game, but there's not a chance in hell you're representing the AFC in the Super Bowl. And then we all know how that played out. That's my worry with Kenny. And so again, his ability, not just to play within structure where I think he's getting better, but that ability out of structure where I think again, that's really the part of his game that I really enjoyed last week. That's another part of this that you need a grow up moment. I think the other two guys, we talk about the grow up moments. Pat Freiermuth, for certainly. I mean, Pat Freiermuth on that last drive was a key part, making all those catches. I mean, the sliding catch on third down. Like I talked about the one where him and Pickett made something happen after the play broke down, finding him in open space. Freiermuth's becoming such a reliable target for Kenny over the middle of the field. And then Pickens in this game, Pickens had a nice one down the sideline, right? The over his head, toe tap, and then run after catch. But I think what you're starting to see from Pickens is that route, the route tree expanding more and more. They were running him, they ran him on that slant route. They were running him on dig routes in this game. It wasn't just everything with Pickens is either a comeback or go, right? I mean, it seemed like early on in Pickens' career, it was either, okay, you're just gonna be our go ball guy, or we'll get him on a comeback every once in a while. Feels like his route tree starting to open up a little more. Kenny's starting to trust him. Still would like to see, more plays just designed to go to Pickens. But, as Kenny says, look, there are a lot of times, especially with this team now, where they're rotating into cover two. I mean, a lot of teams right now, especially with what Vegas did. Vegas is primarily a cover three team, and that's what Gus Bradley does. To see them kind of rotate into cover two as much as they did in this football game, and to watch Kenny understand that, dissect it, and still be able to make some throws in that one. I think that was, as I said, I mean, I think this was certainly a better performance on the All-22 than it was maybe in game. And I certainly enjoyed seeing that. Look, Najee, as far as the grow up moments for Najee in this one, obviously the running game was feast or famine again. I think there were so many times in this one where, the running game was just going nowhere fast. You could tell that as soon as Najee got the ball in his hands. This was back to a lot of what we saw last year where, Najee was, he was having to make guys miss in the backfield or right at the line of scrimmage in order to get anything going. Very few actual holes to work through. I do think still at times, his vision is somewhat in question at times. It just feels like he could do a better job of manipulating linebackers on cutback runs or, cutting things back more often. But, again, I don't want to get too much on Najee. Obviously, there wasn't a whole lot to work with last week. Not necessarily because of the O-line. I don't think the O-line had its greatest game from a run blocking perspective. But I do think in this one, it was much more about the tight ends. I thought certainly Pat Freiermuth and even Zach Gentry at times, just not good on some of these runs. On sealing the edge, or whether it was a crackback, just not a great job at holding blocks, or certainly in those kind of zone reads where you're working 2-to-1, just not getting off the block and getting to the second level. Again, it just gives Najee nothing to work with there, and it's why I think you're seeing so much of guys like a guy like Trent Scott. The sixth offensive lineman is definitely becoming a thing now, and you're starting to see more Connor Hayward worked into this thing. I think the offensive line. Look, this is not a great offensive line. No one's going to tell you this is a great offensive line, but I do think that they're getting better. I think Dan Moore certainly, has just been a guy who since the break. I mean, it's just how many weeks in a row have we seen of this guy not really giving up a ton of pressure? I don't know. Did he? I don't think he's given up. I think I saw the stat the other day where he hasn't given up. He hasn't given up more than 2 pressures since the bye. So he's been playing really well. I know that he's a guy who a lot of people would tell you, you'd probably want to see him. Let's see, against it was week 16. We want to see. Yeah, Dan Moore gave up 2 pressures in this game, and then 1 against Baltimore. So yeah, I mean, again, since the bye, certainly not been the revolving door that he had been earlier in the year. And I know that Dan Moore is the kind of player that people are going to want to think in the offseason, like they could easily get better here. I'm not going to disagree with that, but I do think we need to take everything into account here. He's a young player, second-year guy, continues to get better year over year. I quite honestly, you could probably make a better argument in my mind for getting a great center, like that kid from Michigan in the second round or something like that, and getting a stalwart in the middle of this defense, because Mason Cole is a 5th-year player, and I just don't know that there's a ton of upside, right? I mean, I don't watch Mason Cole on a week-to-week basis saying, this guy's getting better. I think Mason Cole is who he is. He's fine. He's serviceable. He's certainly a massive improvement over who Kendrick Green was. But I think from this offensive line's perspective, and a lot of the young guys on this offense, the James Daniels, who's in just his fifth year, the Okorafor is in his fifth year, and now Dan Moore, who's in his third year. I think those guys are getting better. Obviously, Dotson, probably not long for this team. He's the one guy who I could easily see them upgrading over. But again, I think not enough credit is given to the offensive line and some of the growth that we've seen out of these players. Not a great offensive line yet, but I think they're getting better. I mean, I think just overall, you talk about those grow up moments. I mean, this team's just got to. It lacks polish. I mean, it lacks that kind of finishing touch. Specifically, they're having a really tough time. This has been all throughout this offensive resurgence. We've seen this offense have a really tough time finishing drives. Too many field goals in this game itself. Boz kicked 4 field goals in this one. He had 2 that he made, 2 that he missed. So that's what 5 scoring opportunities for the Pittsburgh Steelers in this one, and they come away with 13 points. You can't do that. You just can't do that. This team, it goes back to what happened in that Atlanta game, right? I would have said that Atlanta game was a good game offensively because they moved the ball well, but you got to come away with points, and especially in a matchup like this against Baltimore on Sunday, they got to come away with points. It was a big problem with that game. You go back to that game, 16-10. What was the problem? Well, they could not finish drives, and it was in that game it was turnovers, not field goals. That was the problem. The other big thing in this game is going to be the run defense. Obviously, there's 2 things that were massively, massively wrong. It was the turnovers and the play of the quarterback in that first matchup. And then on the defensive side, they could not stop the run. They could not stop the run whatsoever. Now, they've done a great job over the last 2 weeks. I have had this theory, though, that, and I've said this before, but I think the Steelers' run defense is a bit kind of a bully mentality. They'll run over, they'll kind of run over you if you are, they'll kind of punch you in the mouth, see what happens. What they don't like, though, like any bully, they just don't like when you punch back. And I think that's what happened against Baltimore. Is Baltimore punched back and the Steelers on defense and they got certainly it was the Ravens being the bully in that matchup. But in the last 2 games, the Steelers have really dominated the line of scrimmage. Obviously, that's been a big part of that's been Cam Hayward and his resurgence in these last couple of weeks. You're going to need that again on Sunday night. You're going to need a vintage Cam Hayward performance because Ogunjobi's out. Well, I shouldn't say he's out. He's questionable right now, but he got that toe injury. We'll see if he plays in this one. That's going to mean, though, without Chris Wormley now. Remember, Chris Wormley gone for the year. That's going to mean that it's going to be one of Leal or Loudermilk to really step up. Because if the Steelers are going to stay in a lot of base in this game, and you would imagine they will, they've been playing a lot of Cam in that nose position, letting him take on double teams where he can still hold his own. Because what you don't need is like a Montravius Adams or Tyson Oliver just completely getting run over, which is what happened in the first game. The first game was a lot of guys just absolutely getting moved off the football, and before a linebacker could even fill, Dobbins or Edwards was already 3-4 yards down the field. And that was just a consistent theme of the matchup a month ago. Loudermilk last week, I think, only played like 4 or 5 snaps in the run game. He was not good. He was getting pushed around. I'm be interested to see who this is, especially if Ogunjobi either can't play or is limited in this one. Who do the Steelers turn to in that run defense? Is it DeMarvin Leal, who I think at this point certainly everyone will tell you has been a much better pass rusher than he has been a kind of an interior run stuffer. But Loudermilk was he's the bigger guy, right? He was the guy, more capable when he was drafted, and certainly now in year 2, you would say certainly should be more capable of being that kind of stout at the point of attack. Keep my linebackers clean behind me type of player. He was certainly not that last week. And it's going to need to be a big performance out of one of these 2 in order for this defense to take a big step forward. How about this? Robert Spillane has been the best run defender for the Steelers. Okay, I'm gonna back up for a second. Robert Spillane has been the best run defender outside of Cam Hayward for the past 2 weeks. And there's no question in my mind. Watching back these defensive performances the last 2 weeks, the guy who stands out more than anyone is Robert Spillane on that defense. Obviously, Cam had monster games, but you expect that, there's a part of you that's not necessarily shocked to see Cam Hayward having monster games. Robert Spillane has been just a bowling ball to the line of scrimmage. And they're going to need him to do that again. Because again, when we talk about that bully mentality, Spillane's got to be in there wanting contact. And I understand that against the Ravens and all the misdirection that they're going to bring in the running game, it makes it hard to play on your toes. You want to play on your heels because you want to keep everything in front of you and understand where the ball is going, right? So it's hard to commit. But they need Robert Spillane playing downhill in this one. Because when he plays downhill, it's like it is a catalyst for everything else that's happening. 41. How about this? In a year where is this the year that Devin Bush turns a corner? Is this the year where Miles Jack, rejuvenates that Steelers inside linebacking core? In week 17, I'm here telling you, no. The key to this football game is Robert Spillane. And the key to this football game is not just Robert Spillane. The key to this football game is Robert Spillane's ability not just to be a kind of downhill guy in the running game, but to be good enough in pass protection that it just doesn't become a kind of they're just going to pick on Robert type of game like you saw in the Jets game a couple months ago. Another big get for the Steelers in this one is Terrell Edmunds. Back, healthy, huge, been a very, very good player this year. Really underrated on this defense, what he's done at that strong safety position, especially as his ability to come down in the running game. I know he played last time these two teams played. He did not have a great game. Certainly not. Obviously only can go up in there, but no, I think he's proved his worth so many weeks. I'm gonna say that one against Baltimore was an outlier game. It certainly has been. I mean, it just was. I mean, when you look at what he's done, the totality of his season that he's had, especially in run defense, I would say that what he did against Baltimore was more of a that was much more of an outlier than other games. So, all right. That'll do it for me today. I'm going to be doing AFC North Talk here. That's why I have to end this thing early. I join me over on AFC North Talk. I'm going to be doing AFC North Talk at 5 o'clock. Those of you who don't watch the show, it is a roundtable show all about the AFC North. That'll be starting at 5 o'clock. It's going to be 30 minutes to prep for that show. Thank you all for watching today. And I'll be back next week right here for more Steeler Country.